Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Economic Policy Review Committee. I am Claire Christian, MHK, Chair of this committee, and with me are Mr Jason Morehouse, MHK, and Mr Jon Wannenberg, MHK. Today we will be taking annual oral evidence from the Gambling Supervision Commission. Welcome all. For the benefit of Hansard and anyone listening, please could you introduce yourself, including your title and how long you have been in post. Thank you, Mr Rutherford.
So I'm Mark Rutherford. I'm currently the Deputy Chief Executive and the Acting Chief Officer of the Gambling Supervision Commission. I've been in post for 15 years.
Thank you. Mr Allen.
Yes, my name is Jon Allen. I'm Chair of the Board of the Gambling Supervision Commission. I've almost exactly been there 15 years.
Thank you. Just move on to some general questions. Are there any new challenges that have emerged since we last met, which was in February 2022?
Yes, definitely. And I suspect it's one we'll be talking about quite a lot. So in December 2022, Isle of Man government commissioned a study to understand how ready it was for the Moneyval visit, which is scheduled for sometime in 2026, as we believe at the moment. And that indicated a number of requirements that we were not at that time meeting. Mm-hmm. So two of those were particularly significant. One, that our attitude to enforcement was out of alignment with the international standards. And the second one was that we needed to ring fence as a dedicated division for AML and CFT compliance, so that our general compliance work wouldn't cannibalise that resource.
Thank you. We're going to go on to a little bit later into enforcement and also AML. What are your main priorities for the upcoming year? So,
our number one priority operationally is making sure that we've got a good story to tell to Moneyval, mm-hmm. and we have. We've been preparing for Moneyval for the last 9 years, ever since the last one. Back then, the problem was data. There wasn't enough data to inform the national risk assessment. Well, there was, but it was not the situation where we wanted it to be. So we've spent the last 9 years gathering that data. And then more broadly, I think our mission overlaps with some of the priorities that Chief Minister outlined in his April 2024 proposals, which were financial discipline, growing the economy, and to a certain extent safety and security. And the other three don't really impact on us, but those three do.
Could you explain a little bit more how financial discipline affects you?
Yes, so traditionally we've covered our costs from fees and returned a small surplus to government each year. With the creation of the AML division, that margin has shrunk significantly, and we are now in a position where we don't have that much contingency. So we will still cover our costs, but to factor into that, because our enforcement attitude, well, our attitude hasn't altered that much, but the way we process non-compliance in the most serious cases now is, and you'll have seen in the news that we've issued our first regulatory settlement. Mm-hmm. That could have a chilling effect on business, incoming business to the Isle of Man or existing business. It's too early to tell, but that might affect our revenue, because if business decides that coming to the Isle of Man is not for them anymore because of the chances of being enforced against, then obviously our licence revenue will fall.
And when do you expect to be able to see if that's affected businesses?
I would say that's a year-long look. At the moment, for example, we've got 7 licence applications, which is pretty much as normal. But what we have seen on 2 occasions, and I appreciate 2 swallows don't make a summer, we have seen where we've gone on an AML inspection and found deficiencies, and the company has then decided it's expedient to surrender the licence and go somewhere else. Right. As it happens, we do have a fairly long arm. We can reach out back to those companies and bring them back and hold them to account. But it would be complacent not to see that as a trend, but it's too soon to see if it is.
Mm-hmm. And the second area you said about growing the economy, could you talk about that?
Yeah, so from time to time, we're in the lucky position because we're very close to industry. Our main mission is safety, safety for consumers and for society. But we do have a secondary mission of opportunity. So provided all of the things that matter to us as a regulator are covered off, then if industry has space to grow and become internationally competitive, then we won't stand in its way. And there's been a number of initiatives that we've undertaken in response to industry feedback. So in 2016, for example, we introduced changes to the way problem gambling could be dealt with to make it more effective. In 2019, we opened a new license type to allow business to more smoothly deal with its counterparts in the world. So those licenses sometimes are fairly niche. In the case of software, in 2019, that's now about 45% of our overall business by license type. So that's what I mean by economic opportunities. Mm-hmm. And that's brought in a whole new type of company, a new class of company to the Isle of Man, which previously we didn't have.
Thank you. So my next question is really about the management control and how it's divided into 4 divisions. You touched a little bit about that before, saying
yes.
about a dedicated division of AML. Could you just talk about the 4 structures there?
Yeah, of course. So 2 years ago, licence numbers were getting to the stage where it was unfair to expect one director to control the whole of the business, which is what we had up until then. And so we temporarily divided ourselves into 2 and spread the load between the director and the deputy director. Mm-hmm. And then we had the December report in 2022 saying you need another organ. So that's where our 4 divisions came from. And so we now have a situation where we are scaled up for the foreseeable future. We have an operations division that does central services for everybody, and we have 3 technical divisions. We have a division that's dedicated to AML safety and enforcement. We have a division that's dedicated to general supervision and consumer protection, and we have a dedicated division that is dealing with incoming applications and business.
Thank you. And do you see that this structure is the right structure going forward, or do you see that developing further?
Yeah, so the structure that we set up, we targeted, we're coming up to 100 licenses, and it's a bit like the sound barrier. It's quite difficult to break that because we lose business and we gain business. But there's a sort of a sawtooth effect, but we are approaching 100, and the arrangements we now have in place allow us to expand to about 140. And the reason, so broadly, there's a safe ratio of inspectors to business, mm-hmm. and it's roughly between 1 to 15, 1 to 20. So every time we grow by a certain amount, then we recruit another inspector, and that manages that risk for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions?
One question for you. You say we lose businesses.
Yes.
What would be the reason for that?
All sorts of reasons.
Yeah, commercial reasons are a main drive. People still think it's, a land of opportunity, so they turn up and they spend an awful lot of money on marketing and software services and think they have something, and quite often they just simply don't. And then they tend to be very wealthy individuals and they lose interest. So I would say the majority are literally changes of priority of the UBO.
There's nothing that we're doing wrong, for instance.
No, we're not doing anything wrong, to the best of my knowledge.
So every jurisdiction has got a sort of a profile, and if you throw business at those 3 or 4 different profiles, some will stick because it suits it. So, for example, the business that we find in Gibraltar, that tends to be big business, UK facing, etc. Probably wouldn't thrive over here. Likewise, the sort of profile that we have attracts a certain type of company. And there's also risk appetites in each jurisdiction. So we're attracting a particular type based on our taxation regime, the quality of our infrastructure, the availability of power and hosting centres and so on and so forth, and to a certain extent the reputation that the Isle of Man's law has in this space. So.
Okay, thank you.
Just one second, Mr. Morehouse. So it's quite interesting that you mentioned that has quite an effect on the type of business that we're attracting. And in your opinion, do you think that we're missing out some opportunities there because of perhaps our laws or because of perhaps our infrastructure?
I don't know. I mean, it'd be very rude of me to suggest that we could poach business from other places, but if we take for example a company that's in Gibraltar, if one of those was to move to the Isle of Man, that would bring 300 or 400 people or so, and we have an arrangement in the Isle of Man that we're quite proud of, and the industry is quite proud of as well, which is that player funds are segregated from business funds. Mm-hmm. And if we were to bring a large company across, they would suddenly have to find a chunk of money to protect the customers' funds and put it to one side, effectively in a sock. So that's an example of why we wouldn't be able to bring that business to the Isle of Man. We'd be very sceptical. But they may have aspirations to look at markets which Gibraltar won't allow them to, but we will. And so we might get a piece of their business set up as the Isle of Man, almost like a subsidiary, right, and operate under the Isle of Man licence.
Thank you. Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you. Just moving on to the licensing section in more detail. In terms of the 100 figure, is that of significance? It sounds significant to us.
If you ask Mark Lewin or Lyle Raxel, I think they will see that as some sort of milestone, definitely. We're agnostic, really. We'll take what comes to us and we'll make sure it's regulated as safely as possible. As a regulator, we don't really have a view on the prosperity that the industry brings to the Isle of Man. Our focus is on safety. I live here, I've got children here with my Isle of Man hat on. Yes, I have a view on 100 and beyond, but not as a regulator.
And in terms of the infrastructure allowing to have 140 licenses, does that enable you to have a real flex in terms of different types of licenses, or is it 100 of one, 40 of the other, or how's the mix going to restrict that 140 capacity?
Right, let me have a think about that.
I don't think I just to jump in. I don't think there's a capacity issue really in terms of numbers of license holders and between types. We have, as we mentioned, a large number of software license holders, and they have a much smaller footprint on the Isle of Man. They have less of an implication on the Isle of Man. And they don't hold players' funds, so they have a slightly different supervision requirement. So there is a greater level of supervision when there's consumers' funds involved. But I don't think we're anywhere near capacity on that.
No, I don't think it's an interesting point that John raises. Some of our licenses carry more of an overhead from a regulatory perspective than others. So that 140 is predicated on the standard mix. So for every 5 licensees we have, 2 will be software, 1 will be network, and 2 will be business to customer. If the trend continues and we get more business to business, we could probably accommodate more, because the supervision overhead isn't as heavy for software supplier licenses.
Thank you. How many new licenses have been granted this year?
This year, I should know that. I can't tell you the exact figure. I can tell you the figure if you give me some.
Is it within the expected range? Is it something you feel quite comfortable with?
So our targets are set to a certain extent in negotiation with Treasury. We have actually indicated to them that the targets that we've got seem to be a little bit higher than we'd expect. But we're broadly, year on year, I would say we're on parity with last year. I can get you the exact, I have brought my machine, I can get you the exact number. If you grill him, I'll go on my machine.
And just in terms of gambling, are they all in the gambling sector, or do you have some in the medical cannabis area? Is it
so
a mix?
In the medicinal cannabis space, we have one approved application with a letter of approval. our policy is not to issue the license until it's needed. Obviously, building a cannabis farm and going through the process to get that accredited medically so it's safe takes hundreds of thousands of pounds, takes years. And it seems perverse to impose a license fee on them when they can't produce anything. So that license will be issued when they're ready to start producing. We're in long-term discussions with 2 other operators who want a cannabis license from us. And then we have 1 license that's been issued for transport and storage, but obviously without a sector on the Isle of Man to support, that's not very useful for them at the moment. So.
Thank you. At the meeting last year, you made references to new licence types being introduced if desirable. Has there been any changes in that area? Have any new licences come through, or do you expect to see any coming through in the future?
DfE have conducted an exercise to create the e-gaming strategy for the next 5 years. I think they've tendered that's in some sort of standstill period at the moment. So we'll be feeding into that. When they went out to the sector to understand what the sector wanted, there was discussion about whether new licence types or changes in policy to existing licence types could be made. And I'll give you an example. So at the moment, under a software supplier licence, you can do quite a broad range of things. You can write software and sell it or rent it. You can create back office systems which companies can use and just plug in players. But there are all sorts of other services like player verification services or odds provision services. We've made decisions not to license some of those. Affiliates is one of them. The strategy might be that we pivot towards licensing some of those as well. So the existing license structure would support that. And as I said, in the past, industry have come to us and said it's really difficult to do business, but if we had this type of license, it would work for us, and we've done that. So it's entirely possible that coming out of the strategy this time, there'll be another call for a particular type of license, which accommodates the evolution that's taken place in the gaming sector since the last time we issued a license time. So,
thank you. What factors determine the license fee structure, and how competitive are we? And are there ongoing changes in the area? Is it something that's quite consistent?
Yes, okay. So in terms of competitive, that profile that each jurisdiction has is the main attractor for business. The license fee in the scheme of things, it's sizable. I mean, it's £36,500 or something like that for a standard license. But that tends to be a drop in the ocean compared to the price of marketing and hiring staff and running a compliance function. So we have a policy on licensing which is fixed fee. So you pay us a fixed fee to make your application, and then whether our application takes 12 weeks or a year, that you've paid your fee. There are other jurisdictions where that is charged by the hour, so there's a certain degree of uncertainty. Our policy is that you can make the application in person, or you can hire somebody on your behalf, like a corporate service provider who's got experience to do that. We don't discriminate between those two. In some jurisdictions, you have to go through a third party to get your license, or to have a realistic chance of getting your license. And our fees when I joined the Commission in 2009, our fee for an online gambling regulation license was £35,000. A couple of years ago, Treasury asked us to raise that by 5% as a general sort of fiscal measure, but other than that, it's been the same for years. So,
thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wannenberg.
Thank you. Gentlemen, we're going to go into the current regulatory environment. Can you give us an overview of your supervisory methodology? Has this changed at all since we last met? John?
Me?
Yeah. What we last met.
Has it changed since we last met? I don't think so. Obviously, the authority itself has grown. I don't think, and we put into process a whole series of risk based assessments and things, but most of these things are tinkered with over time to develop the way we do things. But it's not. I don't think materially we've changed our approach, certainly in the past year. Mark, can you think of a?
Yeah. So it's a story of two halves. So what is the same is the seriousness with which we take our compliance mission. So we conduct regular inspections. We've done 25 of them this year. There's another one coming up next week. We divide our inspections into two types. There's anti-money laundering, terrorist finance and proliferation financing inspections, and then our general supervision inspections, which focus on consumer protection. Are the controls in place to help the young and vulnerable be identified and removed from the piece? So that hasn't changed. Our mission hasn't changed. What has changed is the machinery that we use to deal with serious issues. Hitherto, historically, when we found issues, we would guide that operator back into compliance, and that worked. We never had a situation where they wouldn't go back into compliance and maintain that. And if they failed to maintain it, and in some cases you find a problem here and you remediate that, and the problem pops up here, and some companies don't have the capacity to remediate fully because they haven't got the resource, for example, then we would expel them from the sector. So whereas now, and John's right, we've built the machinery for our enforcement division. It's taken probably about 14 months to do that, but now we have it. We're now able to, rather than simply light touch guide you into compliance or harshly expel you from the sector, we now have a range of proportionate sanctions that we can use to not only encourage a particular company back into compliance, but to signal to the rest of the sector what kind of activity you can do to warrant that kind of intervention from us. So that has changed. And I mentioned at the start, in 2022, when we had that report from the expert group of assessors, they said guiding people into compliance is great, but it's not going to wash with Moneyval, because they all come from countries where the regulator is at war with the sector and lawyers are in the middle intermediating every single action. So that's what's expected, and that is the international standard. So in a sense, that has changed. We are now in the position to operate a proportionate response to non-compliance.
I would add, it's not our intent to go to war with anybody. It's not. That's so. From a board perspective, we've seen the advance of the this sort of extra scrutiny and harsher approach to things, and we're not. We understand why it's required. It's not something we particularly want to see develop into an us versus them. Well, we certainly don't want to see it develop into an us versus them situation. So we're, as a board, we're very keen to make sure that we are, as Mark says, proportionate, and that's certainly one of our missions.
Yeah, I must add, we're not in the business of quotes looking for bodies. So if we see a minor infraction, we want to go, all right, okay, you're for the high jump now. If it's minor, we'll simply remediate you back into compliance. It's where we have egregious failings where we'll intervene now.
And I'm sure that this type of well-regulated environment is attractive to businesses wanting to come here because it's a mature sector.
Yeah, I think the nervousness is about other jurisdictions where the relationship is not the same as it is here. We are regarded as a very approachable and workable jurisdiction, and that serves us incredibly well. Yeah. I think in other jurisdictions, people see this sort of approach of fines and serious case reviews and those sort of things as quite alarming. And that's the nervousness Mark mentioned before, the slight nervousness we have about future business. is what impact this has, not because we've been slack in allowing poor business to operate here. It's just we have a different approach to it, which has been bring them back into compliance. If they can't make it, we ask them to leave, or they give up because it's too expensive.
But there is another dimension to your question, and it's this. So most regulators come into being because there's some sort of social requirement for it. Gambling needs to be controlled because there are risks attached to it for society. At some stage, the regulator gets to a position where they're on top of that and they're managing that issue, and society calms down. There is a danger that regulators can start embellishing and becoming more and more nuanced and become almost like a menace to the economy. And when that happens, and there's political sympathy for the regulated business, then the regulator's got to have a good hard think about where they are in that swing of the pendulum, because the worst case scenario is they turn to their industry and say, can you tell the politicians and the public that we are regulating appropriately, and if that's effectively regulatory capture. And we have to constantly analyse whereabouts we are in that swing, and to make sure that we're getting the balance just right. So,
okay, thank you. That's interesting. So, bearing in mind with what you just said, how do you keep up to date and aligned with international best practices within the industry?
Right. So first and foremost, gambling law around the globe almost always has the same three mandates, which is to exclude criminality, to protect the young and the vulnerable, and to make sure that gaming is fair. And for our cannabis mission, our job is to prevent the misuse of drugs, which is effectively for cannabis, stopping cannabis from being used for anything other than for medical purposes or research into medicine. So our law already defines our practice. In terms of staying up to date, we attend 2 events annually, which brings regulators from around the world together to share their experiences and to share their opinions and views on how to interpret those 3 core mandates. So I'll give you an example. We went to one conference just recently, and there the Danish regulator introduced what they'd done in their space to combat the problem that children in school were gambling using mobile phones. And they explained what they did, and they explained how it worked. And rather counterintuitively, what they did is they went into school and they showed the children what gambling was. They showed them how to gamble, and they showed them what the odds were, what the gambling could result in terms of loss of money, loss of sort of mental health, welfare, etc. And so that was interesting. And we come back from that conference thinking, I wonder if we've got a problem and should we be looking at that. We also had another presentation from an academic from Norway, and he frames problem gambling in terms of a public health response, i.e. the country says, I know this product is banned, and an individual response, which is effectively, we will give you all the controls you need to control your gambling, and if you still have a problem with your gambling, we will give you the signposting to organisations that can help, and it becomes a clinical matter. And what they concluded was that if a person sets limits when they set up an account, that prevents problem gambling better than if you allow somebody to set limits once they've started gambling. But again, that's for the Norwegian market, so whether that dynamic works elsewhere. The UK are doing some very interesting work in terms of credit cards and certain types of product. So we have an opportunity to not only understand what other countries are doing, but also to understand if they're working or not.
Yeah, so we follow trends, really, John. We can see what's going on in the world. There are a large number of the attendees are very concerned about inward looking at their own population. So a lot of things don't quite apply quite to the same extent to us. But there's a lot of writing on the wall. The EU is very keen on ESG currently. That is something they're actually, Malta is looking at imposing ESG standards and regulations. That we have to be careful not to have too many regulations because it drives business away. It makes it impossible to do it. So
we've also got a good track record. I mean, we've been in this business since 2001 in the online space. Our law hasn't had to be updated majorly. Now, society norms and mores are shifting around that. So obviously, there's greater emphasis on some areas than others. But broadly speaking, the law does the heavy lifting. And in predicting the risks, Keys or Tynwald, etc., have made a pretty good job of it. Yeah.
Mr. Wannenberg, if I might just follow up with a question just on that. You mentioned about the education and children, and you come back and you're reviewing that. How are you reviewing it? What steps have you taken?
So at the moment, all regulators have got 2 domains that they can operate in. The first domain is there's the law, and everyone who's obliged under the law must be made to apply the law. There's another domain which is harm reduction. And you might like to think they overlap perfectly, but they don't. They sort of overlap like a Venn diagram. So in the middle, we've got people who aren't obeying the law and are creating harm. So we operate there, of course. Then regulators have to choose which of the other 2 to put their resource into generally. At the moment, the way that the GSC's run has been on that apply the law. So we make sure the law is fit for purpose, and then we make sure we apply it, and we patrol our estate, and we check that they understand the law and that they're meeting their obligations. What we've been less efficient at is on the harm reduction side. So it's a bit like the law will solve most of the problems, but there will be small pockets of harm where we need to become creative. And the difficulty we have, because we're creatures of statute, sometimes the practical response that's needed for a pocket of harm may sit outside your powers. It might sit outside your law. So you are in the danger zone when you effectively mitigate those harms. If they have any sort of impact on your stakeholders, then you're vulnerable to criticism. Mm-hmm. So I think I've been successful in being recruited as the next chief exec for the GSC, and part of my focus is going to be on that. And there's 2 areas that particularly warrant my attention. The first is, we used to have a system whereby if you wish to self-exclude from all of the gambling companies and under our licensing, you could ask us to do that, and we would send your details to all the gambling companies, and they would create an account in your name, and then they would close it, so that if you tried to open that account, you'd be recognised and excluded. We had some advice on GDPR, so that process required the consent of the data subject for us to take the data and send it. We had advice which said that we could, as government, we're not allowed to rely upon consent as a legal basis for sharing information. So that system had to be abandoned, which was a great loss. So we know the UK have recently put such a system into position, and they're subject to exactly the same GDPR rules as we are. Mm-hmm. So in 2 weeks' time, I'm meeting with the UK, and I'm going to ask them how they've done that, so that we can reinstate that. So that's one of my priorities.
Just to interrupt you on that, would you possibly be able to update the committee on the result of that meeting in a couple of weeks?
Let me just make a note of that.
The clerk can also send a summary of today with some questions. Just 1 second, he's going to go on to the second part. Thank you, Mr. Rutherford.
So the other area of focus is slightly more difficult. We know that people who develop problems with gambling, they often confide in others, like a doctor. They'll say, I've got a problem, I'm anxious or depressed, and etc. There's no way at the moment for that doctor to be able to tell all the gambling companies, my patient has got a problem with gambling, and if they continue to gamble on your platform, their welfare is going to be affected. Mm-hmm. So how do we, and there's all sorts of barriers around that, sort of patient confidentiality, the GDPR, just the practicalities of administering that system. So we're in discussion with one of the winners of the Innovation Challenge last year that the Ironman held, and they're grappling with this issue to see if some sort of arrangement can be made where certain people can report that somebody has a problem, and the gaming companies can reach in and see if that person is, if they get a new account opening, they can reach out to that database and see if that person's on it. But it has to be couched in a way that it's sort of anonymous. So there may be a way where data can be taken, put into that and scrambled, and then if you take your player and scramble the data in the same way and you get a match, you don't know who that player is, but you know that they may be one of those people in the database. And that could prompt you then to perform a more detailed affordability check or something like that. So it's early days on that, but I see that as being one of the gaps we need to plug.
Thank you. Mr. Morehouse.
And just going back to this, I recognise your limits and I respect them, but in terms of the revelation that you got in terms of the gambling within schools and way to tackle it, if you can't actually go forward in that area quite quickly, is it something you could actually pass on to the education department for them to consider? Or
so in Denmark it came about because the teachers said we've got a problem, and the Gambling Commission in Denmark, the Spillemyndigheden, they owned that problem, and they worked up their response. So if somebody were to come to us and say we have a problem in our schools, then yes, that's where I would put my focus. But in absence of that, I think the best use of our resources on those sort of initiatives I've highlighted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you.
Wallenberg.
It would be remiss of me not to say congratulations on your appointment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wallenberg.
And your Danish pronunciation is commendable. What are some of the common reasons for a license being denied or surrendered?
Right. I mean, John could probably speak to this more, well, could speak to this as well, but essentially, not all licenses that arrive as an application make it to the Commission for approval. So we may develop concerns about a particular license. So a licensee may have individuals on it that where there's significant adverse media, and when we try and chase that to ground, we can't get satisfaction. Very occasionally, we find that we don't get satisfactory answers to our questions, and when we push, they just go, oh, do you know what, bye, because it's uncomfortable for them. So, and then very, very rarely we get applications where from dumb criminals who think the Isle of Man is not going to look at their passport and verify it, so they've faked it on MS Paint or something like that. So we screen that, and then what gets through to the Commission, generally speaking, is fit business. That's not to say that we won't carry a certain amount of risk in our licensing, because until the maximum innocent until proven guilty is sort of dear to our heart. So if there's adverse media, but it's not at a certain threshold, we may say we will take a risk on that business, but we will put enhanced monitoring around it. And generally speaking, if I just look at criminality for a moment, criminals understand there's consequences for being caught. Sophisticated criminals work very hard to understand what a gaming company would look like. So you're not likely to catch those at entry, but you are going to catch them in monitoring, because sooner or later they'll slip up, and that's where you find them. So, and we act in concert with all the agencies in the Isle of Man under the FATF model. So we have excellent interregulatory cooperation with law enforcement, with business, and with other regulators, and the FIU, of course. And periodically we will see something which we think is suspicious and file a suspicious activity report, or we'll find something which is anomalous and we'll file under Section 24 of the FIU Act. The FIU takes that, they take their own counsel on what they do with that, but they can disseminate that to other organisations, and of course they've got access to the Egmont structure as well, which all the other FIUs from other countries are attached to. So, yeah.
Okay, and at our last hearing, we asked if the escalation in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine had had an impact on the Isle of Man's online gambling sector. At the time, you said it was too early to tell, but that it was unlikely to have much of an effect. What is your answer now?
I would say it has implications for the sector as a whole. So, for instance, there's smart people in Ukraine. You know, they have a lot of techies out there. There's a lot of software-driven business there, and they've had to do business in a different way. So we've had Ukraine nationals who've had to move jurisdiction and that sort of thing. But in terms of the level of business, I mean, we screen out Russian business. So that wasn't a material part of anything that we do. So we didn't suddenly lose, a number of license holders because they happened to be Russian owners, because we didn't have them in the first place. It hasn't. I can't speak for all of our license holders in terms of where they took their business from and whether it's had a material impact on the level of their business. But in terms of our business, the licensing business, we've seen implications, but not an impact.
Not significant. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you. Returning to preparation for Moneyval, you made references already. How are preparations going?
Well, as I said, we've been preparing for 9 years, so there's been various statistical models which we've been servicing throughout this time. And when we talk about preparation for Moneyval, there's two themes. One is business as usual. So we have been conducting AML inspections since the last Moneyval evaluation and reacting to the findings. So, and in a way, Moneyval should be able to drop in on us anytime unannounced and see that we're walking the walk. When we talk about specific Moneyval preparations, some of that is building that machinery that was highlighted to us in that December 2022 study, and some of it is just the sheer work needed to present to Moneyval in a way that is efficient. So one of the things we do, for example, is we are looking for case studies that we can use to explain to Moneyval in concrete terms what we actually do. So let me see if I can drum up a hypothetical example. Somebody comes to us and says, I've got concerns about the gambling company that I work for. I'm a whistleblower. And we will look at that and go, okay, that doesn't seem to touch on our regulatory ambit because my power stops at the 12-mile limit and this is happening in another country. But I wonder if somebody in that country would like to know that. So we will put that submission into the FIU. That will go up to the equivalent country's FIU and then down to their gambling regulator and then into that company. And that's a great case study in showing how the FATF framework is meant to work and is working. So some of the preparation we're doing is in that sort of vein. The other thing we're putting an enormous amount of effort into is the national risk assessment. And we're coping, but it's dominating our work at the moment. It's a significant piece of work to do properly, and we're absolutely committed to making sure that tells the story.
Just to embellish that a bit, we're a significant part of the economy, and also there's a perception about the level of risk associated with gambling operators. So we're taking this whole process and preparation for this process so that no one can point a finger at us. We're at the end of the day, we want to be sure that we've done everything that we could do. And as Mark says, we have spent a lot of resources and an enormous amount of time preparing, and still do. There are still things to do. We're still changing regulations and looking for legal changes and things. Yeah. So it's ongoing.
Thank you. In terms of preparation, you can't do it in isolation. And in your 22-23 annual report, you state that a significant minority of the work required to prepare for Moneyval depends for its success upon pan-government efforts. Would you say that there has been sufficient action from the government in this area?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, so the Chief Minister's committed. He's effectively the sponsor of this project. It is in the financial crime strategy. He says it's crucial that government, business, regulators and law enforcement continue to cooperate and work together to protect the island from the insidious effects of financial crime. I'm confident that he understands the implications if we don't succeed. At the Combating Financial Crime conference yesterday, he indicated the implications for the Isle of Man for failing could be as high as 20% of our GDP. So that's significant for the island, particularly under the current circumstances. So could you repeat your question, Jason?
It's just in terms of, is the government doing enough to support you and enough in kind of its core areas to actually ensure that when Moneyval come, we look as good as we possibly can do?
So I can speak to the structures and organisations that I see within government. So Cabinet Office has a dedicated AML CFT office. There's an absolute enormous amount of work coming out of that for all the agencies. Financial Crime Strategic Board meets and is dominated by Moneyval and preparations for that. And I can speak for ourselves. I'm confident we're on top of it. Not least because we've got some excellent staff who have been through this process in the past, who are Moneyval assessor trained. All of our supervision side staff are achieving either certificates or diplomas in money laundering and terrorist financing. So, yeah, we're taking it very seriously. I wouldn't be able to speak for the rest of government. I don't know where they are, but I've got enough on my plate with gambling.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just moving now a little bit on to staffing, and you've obviously just touched there, saying you've got Moneyval assessor trained staff, etc. Do you think that generally overall that you are adequately staffed?
Yeah, absolutely. We are, for the first time, as of last week, at full complement. Recruitment has been an incredible challenge. As you'd expect, everyone wants people with AML CFT credentials. The last piece of the puzzle for us is around the use of data. So we accumulate a lot of information from our licensees. What we've never really been very good at up until recently is making use of that information to understand patterns and trends and outliers, etc. So our computer system Atlas is good at doing that on an operational level, because it applies all sorts of tests to the data we receive and then indicates to inspectors where to focus. But strategically, what's expected of us as a commission is to look at the data and see where we need to react into it next. So we've just hired effectively a data scientist to look at the vast amount of information we get and to start processing it into packages. But yes, we're ready. And I have to say, we used to have a tremendous problem with staff retention. It takes about 3 years to train up an inspector. That's because, unlike some fields, there are no qualifications that you can attain to become an Isle of Man gambling supervision inspector. So our managers have to train these people up. After 3 years, they go out and they're coming into contact with the very people who we are asking to comply, and they're very attractive as a resource to help that operator. So we used to lose a lot of people to that. But as a result of some of the changes made to our culture and to our conditions, we're now retaining people. And that's incredibly helpful for us, because recruitment is not only is it exhausting, but it's inefficient. It leaves large gaps in capability within the within the organisation, and it takes a lot of effort to recruit properly. So
just earlier you mentioned that you completed 25 inspections this year out of 100 licences. That would
Yes.
then equate to 25%.
those are so far. Those are since April.
And do you have a target, or is that normal? Is that a normal percentage of the amount of licences that you would have?
Yeah, that's breakneck pace that we're operating at. So there was something you just said, and let me see if I can just recall.
There was just to jump in a second. It is a risk-based approach, and so some licence holders don't do anything for a period of time. So there's nothing to inspect. So I don't know how many are actually not operating out of 100. I'm probably putting you on the spot there, Mark, with that. But there are a number that aren't. So it's quite a significant proportion are actually visited or subject to supervision in one form or another every year.
So I've remembered what it was. So we have a risk-based approach. So we look at a licensee, we look at their size, the number of customers, the amount of money that's going through it. We look at other things like the product, and to a certain extent, we look at their compliance history. That puts them onto a ladder, and we take from the top of the ladder and inspect on that basis. The one sort of detail that I think is worth mentioning is in that December 2022, our risk-based approach had said the lowest risk, we can sort of ignore those, and we were told, no, you can't, you have to do something, even if you just look at them once every 6 years. So that created an almost instant backlog for us, and this year we've clawed our way back, and now we're back up to where we needed to be. So and that's taken a lot of effort from the teams.
You've obviously you've improved the retention. You mentioned about changing the culture. What steps have you taken to change the culture?
So you'll remember some of the fallout from the Ranson case was the creation of a public sector integrity line where people could either email or phone anonymously their concerns about an organisation. And it turns out we were one of the launch customers for that, and it surprised us. But we had 2 reports come to us saying, well, they said a number of things, but that we weren't taking our flexible working arrangement obligations seriously, that there was a culture of bullying people out of the organisation if they're not up to standard, that communications was poor, and that the individual behaviours of some of the senior management team was subpar. And once you're put on notice that you've got those sorts of issues, then you've really got to take a good look inside the organisation. So we commissioned the DOHR department to do a comprehensive analysis. So all of the staff were given an opportunity to give their feedback anonymously, and then that was framed as a package for senior management to consider. So the good news is that the bullying thing, which I thought was the most serious, that turned out to be a misunderstanding. And what I mean by that is, if you've got somebody on capability procedures because they've had their chance to get up to speed with the job, but they're simply not performing, you can't tell everybody that they're on capability. But there's an established government process which can ultimately lead to them either leaving or being dismissed. And misunderstanding that process, not being able to see what's going on underneath, that was the issue. That was the underlying issue. For the staff, for the senior management team behaviour, we commissioned 360 feedback, and again, all anonymous. So all of the leaders in the organisation got the opportunity to understand what the staff were saying, and again, a lot of that did come down to poor communications. So if a policy needed to be decided or an issue needed to be decided, that'd be escalated up to the senior management team. That wasn't always getting dealt with efficiently, and staff were constantly having to look to see if something had moved on or not. So we changed the way we do our communications. So if something's on the agenda now and we deal with it, we communicate that out to everybody. And I would say we're sort of a bit more democratic and participative than we have been in the past. So,
It's most of that, to be fair. First of all, there were 2 reports, so you have to take that in side. But the rest of it, a lot of it is growing pains. If you've got a very small organisation, things may not get acted on straight away, and the impact of not acting on that thing on the person who's asked you to look at it, you may not appreciate because you're busy doing this thing and that thing and all the other things. So it's about communication. You need time and space to do communication properly. And the growth of the GSC in terms of numbers and structure has given us that time and space. So it's in part a growing pain rather than a fault in any individuals or people or even culture, I would say, in the GSC.
And how are you looking to develop that now? How are you going to monitor that going forward, the culture and the situation within the gambling supervision?
So there's a broader initiative. Again, it came out from the Chief Minister as a result of the ransom, which is cultural evolution for all of government, away from some of the traditional, into positive values. So listening to people and being good with communication and empowerment and those sorts of things. So we're part of that initiative, and I think for us it's about articulating those values. So openness, participation of staff, etc. So I'll give you an example. When we restructured, we knew that was going to create a lot of change and unsettle people. So we put a document on the network that anyone could put their thoughts down on the restructuring, and we got a lot of feedback, and we oriented it so that you could say who you were or you could remain anonymous. Well, we take that equally. And my personal view is that while most government procedures are designed to allow you to talk to the person who's causing the issues and there's no anonymity, I'd sooner be put on notice that there's an issue if the cost of that is anonymity than people hold back for fear of reprisal, etc. So we got a tremendous amount of feedback on the restructuring, and that allowed us to guide the way we did it. In some cases, we slowed down in a particular area. There was a class of officer within the GSC, and they were uncertain about what their role would be in the new structure. So that was a really good exercise. My intentions are to run the GSC in that way.
Yeah, you could probably get from that Mark's a people person. He's very passionate about his staff, which was part of the reason that he was selected. So we can feel very confident that he is in charge, involved, and has great concern for the people who work for him.
I used to be an IT guy in income tax, switching computers on and off. Yeah, and now I'm sitting in this seat. I'm very privileged to do so. Just because you're not in the senior management team doesn't mean to say you haven't got a good idea, or you're the only person who can see a problem that seems distant to management but is actually significant. So in addition to the natural sympathy I have for humanity, I think there's genuine value in asking people. So Mr. Cannon announced he wants to save £10 million this year. I sent an email to all my staff saying, can I have your ideas, please? Yeah, I got quite a few.
Any good, Mark?
Don't recruit a deputy.
No more staff parties.
which I can't do because I'm doing 2 jobs at the moment. It's killing me. So,
Gentlemen, I'm concerned about your time. We were scheduled to finish approximately now. We have 6 more questions. Are you comfortable? Do you have anywhere to be so we can continue? So just in terms of skills shortages, have you identified any skills shortages within the workforce, and how are you addressing this?
We don't have a skills shortage. Our problem is the time it takes to train. So if the Isle of Man College could lay on a course which is be a GSC inspector, and they could come to us with the qualification and the skills necessary, that'd be great. But the reality is we recruit people who have got some sort of touch on our work. Either they're in compliance and they're coming to us, or they've been in the sector and they understand how the commercial side works, and then we train them up with the skills. So our skills shortage it just takes time, and we've got quite a lot of new starters at the moment that are in process getting trained up.
Are you feeding into the skills board at all?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
And have you continued to offer internships as well?
It's something I'd like to do.
Worked very well for us, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think growing our own wood, as it were, within the GSC would be super. The FSA, I'm jealous of them. They go up to the college and they do teach some of the skills that are needed for regulation. I have to work out whether I can afford the resource to do that. And, so, but yes, I'm thinking about that, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any questions in there?
Could I just ask, on the end of that section, what is the complement of staff that you have?
So we're up to 53 at the moment.
And that's now fully staffed, right? And that post of a data scientist, was that a new post?
And that's a limited term contract. I think that's funded from the Seized Asset Fund.
Oh, okay. Yeah. How long is that for?
2 years, I think.
Thank you.
Mr. Wallenberg, 1 second. Do you have a question? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. On to the next section, which is gambling addiction, something you've already touched on, so I'll bypass a few of the things I was going to mention. What other bodies and agencies does the GSC work with to understand how to prevent gambling addiction?
So we touched on sharing contemporary knowledge. So gambling addiction is a complex, as you'd expect, it's a complex and sensitive area for us. There is a third sector operator within the Isle of Man who deals with gambling addiction locally. That's Motivate through Gamcare Isle of Man, and our industry supports that financially, as well as supporting non-Isle of Man facing charities. In terms of understanding, a lot of that is research. So, for example, I've recently read through a dissertation by one of the members of the Gambling Regulators of Europe Forum that talks about the genesis of we say problem gambling. There are various different schemas within problem gambling. So one of them is it person-based? Is it something about people? So, for example, if you come from a deprived area and you're a male and you're within a certain age and you've got mental health issues, then you're more likely to fall into difficulties. Or is it a place? So, some years ago, it was decided that a particular type of machine in a particular type of venue was an issue, and they were sort of modified. Or is it a product? Again, as an example. There's various debates about what proportion of those three things matter. Academia, in general, this is a systemic issue. In order for an academic to produce material that regulators can take and convert into intelligent interventions to manage risk, you need scientists, effectively, academics, to do research and turn that data into something reliable. There's a sort of reluctance to do that because at the moment the funding for that generally comes from industry, the gambling industry. So academics have got a difficult choice to make, which is, do they take money from the organisation that potentially they could be producing results for that are harmful? So, and there's a general issue around gambling, which is academics need some sort of security of funding. Not just 1 year grants or 2 year grants, but they need some sort of security. So there's never been a successful model where the regulators, the industry, the academics, and the commissioning body have come together and been able to create that ecosystem, which then uses the data from industry to give to the academics who crunch it and turn it into interventions that the regulator then puts into law. The UK almost did it last year. They were in discussion with an Austrian foundation called Lena, who specialise in bringing all those disparate things together and making the machinery work. So industry gives money to the commissioning body, which is arm's length, and they commission the scientists. So there's a systemic issue which we've got to somehow get on top of, and I don't think that's just an Isle of Man thing, that's an industry thing globally.
But it is, there are opportunities, and certainly at the conferences there's a lot of discussion about AI and how we can use AI to analyse data. The issue to make that work is access to data. The data has to all be in the same format, it has to be anonymised, you've got to have fields you can analyse and that sort of thing, and you've got to have permission to share it and all that. So in the future, you know, you could see a world where AI is used to establish patterns and then apply those patterns to an operator's database and say, well, look, this person are doing these things, therefore you need to do something about it. We're looking over the horizon. I mean, we really hope that happens, because anything that improves the detection and the prevention has got to be a good thing. I
think that's possible. At the conference yesterday, somebody was saying that they'd used AI to predict which people within the loan book of a bank were going to default 18 months before they defaulted on that loan. So AI can look at all the data here and map it against outcomes, and then extrapolate back and go, well, actually there is a pattern here. So, and business would be only too happy to use that, because when the regulator turns up and says, what measures are you taking to detect problem gamblers? If they've got something they can plug in that's best in class and get the business certainty that when the regulator turns up, they say, we use this and this is good, then that's going to be phenomenal.
That sounds like Minority Report.
Well, that banking one, yes.
Absolutely. You need to watch the movie if you haven't seen it.
I don't know.
Sorry, Mr. Wannabe.
What predatory practices within the gambling industry has the GSC identified, and how do you regulate against these? Top 3 will do.
Sorry, what was the question?
Predatory
practices?
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Got to find one, Mark.
I've got to find one.
Of the 3.
I've been making it up.
Well, I'm glad to hear that there's...
Yeah.
So I'm not sure it's predatory. Back in 2010-11, there was a rise of social media gambling. So you didn't pay money, but you could play poker with game gold, which you could purchase, etc., or you could play on slots. And there were companies who would offer the real money equivalent. So effectively you would play the social game and you think, I'm pretty good at this, and then you'd convert over, open an account, deposit money, and then suddenly your experience would be very different, because you're playing against a different return to player model. So you could contrive that as predatory practice, but I don't think we had anything on our estate at the time. I know France have had issues with loot boxes in video games, where they've considered that a loot box, where typically a child, playing a game, gets a mystery package, and when they open it, there's a t-shirt or a skin for a gun or whatever. They sort of sought to clamp down on that as youth in gambling by the back door. But in 2016, we moved regulations, which actually predated that problem, which said that is gambling. So if you're going to use it, you're subject to all the safeguards of our law. I'd struggle. Struggle to...
Well, I'm encouraged by that. You're struggling.
Yeah, I'll make a note for next year. We'll try and find one for you.
Thank you. At our last meeting, you told us that the Safer Gambling Coalition, which had been conceived 2.5 years prior, you said that the objective of the Safer Gambling Coalition was to amalgamate all the data from all those members of the Gambling Coalition. and hand that over to an academic for analysis, and then use the analysis to inform clinical and regulatory practice. You also said that you hoped for the Safer Gambling Coalition to receive charitable status by second quarter of 2022. Did that take place?
No. It was based. Like a lot of things. It's based around the enthusiasm and the energy of individuals, and the people driving that found other priorities principally. It is something we would like to support. We'd certainly like the output from. I don't know what the latest is on that, Mark.
Well, there's a broader issue at play, which is, for some reason, the gambling industry has found itself in a position where it funds the research and treatment, and that's effectively a hypothecated tax. Now, that's great because it means the NHS doesn't have to, but the problem that creates is that the amount of money that's contributed defines the size of the problem, and that may not necessarily be the size of the issue. So that's a sort of a structural issue within the problem gambling piece. The other thing, bluntly, it's not a public health priority. Obesity in childhood or smoking, etc., rank far more highly. So certainly with the previous director of public health, we said, how can we get you more interested in this? And she said, it's just not even on my radar. So that's not to say it can't happen, but I think what would be more productive is if we can get some sort of international conversation going about how not just Isle of Man data can be fed into some sort of commissioning body, but everybody's data. Yeah. So, but yeah.
I think there are. I think there are countries that are doing those sort of things, aren't they?
Well, as I said, the UK.
Yeah.
They gave a seminar last year on this whole topic, and it's one of the conversation pieces that I need to have with them in a couple of weeks' time. So,
thank you.
Have you met with the new public health director?
No.
And do you have a meeting planned?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I have now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you. Just thinking to the local economy, the suspension of King Gaming Limited's gambling licence has been announced. We are not going to ask any details of that case, but can you provide any indication about the impact on the island's gambling sector because of that announcement? And yeah, please.
Okay. So I'll be as helpful as I can, subject to the embargoes, which
Thank you.
Your brother. So first thing to say is there's two phases to these sorts of things. Initially, a lead agency, in this case the police, will take charge of that operation, and everyone else is put on hold, as it were, and they do their strike. They arrest people, they seize data, records, etc. And then phase two is they do their interrogations, they go through it, and they draw their conclusions on what's actually happened. So we're not at that stage yet. So that doesn't mean to say that there's not something we need to do. So we were grateful for a fairly detailed briefing from the police when they struck, and they gave us indications and details about the operation, which aren't necessarily regulatory in nature, but which allow us now to go back through not only our existing estate, but some of our historical licenses. And the process for that is, if we find something with the benefit of this extra visibility, then we feed into that network of agencies. So we pass it to the FIU, who can then pass it to the police, who can then pursue that, etc. So that's the regulatory response. In terms of the suspension, etc., so the police indicated that the gaming element could possibly be money laundering. So we suspended out of an abundance of caution, brought forward their inspection, and indicated to them we're going to revoke. And there's due process there. because effectively, the police are telling us this, so we do trust them, but we gave that company 3 months to come back with representation, and then we suspended, then we revoked. What impact has it had on the sector? I haven't seen an impact yet. The licensing numbers aren't slowing down, for new business. It's typically not a conversation that's being had. I appreciate the BBC had their article, which isn't really on the gaming sector. That's on an organisation, Manx Internet Commerce, I think, which is outside of our regulatory ambit. But a lot of the frustration or public concern is local. I've gone to Google from time to time, look up King Gaming, and it's just generally accepted. Every jurisdiction is going to have one of these once in a while. I mean, we've had about 250 licences in our time, and we've had one of them turned into this. So that's not to be complacent. And I think it's I mean, I can't see the economic side of this. So if there is an impact, it's going to be delayed.
I think it's a great credit to the Isle of Man. This was identified and stopped in the Isle of Man, and I don't think we should sit here and say, oh God, look what happened. We should say, we've got a very efficient and effective detection mechanism, which didn't come from us; it came from outside, and matters that don't relate to our regulatory regime. But it's a positive, really, that we identified it and shut it down. Will it have an impact? Our part of it, almost certainly not. There's a lot of press about the building and all the rest of it. I think as a taxpayer, it's a great shame. But if it's bad money, we don't want it, right? And on a bigger scale, I don't think anybody looks at that and says, well, I'm not going to go to the Isle of Man because I can't get away with what I hoped I could get away with, because they couldn't anyway. So.
Brilliant. As companies become more innovative and their products become more advanced, does that create new roles, new opportunities, and new challenges for you in terms of regulation? How do you actually get the balance right?
Yeah, so it's happened 3 times. So from terrestrial gambling into telephone gambling, from telephone into internet, and then from internet into mobile devices. I've seen that progression. I've seen 2 of those progressions in my time with the Commission. So because we have got an open door policy with our sector, and if that sounds altruistic, it's not, it's selfish. It allows us to get ahead of problems before they occur, allows us to develop positions before they become issues. Because we've got that approach, we've been able to get a lot of information from industry about the next big thing. So then we can work up a position which is, these are the safety issues which we've got concerns about. So we've done this with cryptocurrency, for example. We've got a framework now for cryptocurrency that all licensees have to abide by, and it keeps that element sort of safe. But you can only do that in concert with the people who are going to be deploying those solutions. So it's useful to have that, what they call principled intimacy with your sector, in as much as you're cooperating for the greater good of the sort of the industry in the country. So AI is the next one. Yeah.
And could I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by terrestrial gambling?
So terrestrial gambling is the land-based casino, the bookies in the high street, the gambling machines you can play on.
So physical.
The physical, yeah. And that tends to be Isle of Man based.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's quite, when new things come along, we apply the same principles to guard against the 3 concerns, and we look at it practically and say, right, how do we ensure this is fair? How do we protect the vulnerable? And the bit about keeping bad actors out of it doesn't change. Things create levels of difficulty or complexity, but also opportunity. Blockchain can create an opportunity in terms of virtual currencies and identifying where the money has gone, where it's been, who's had it, and all the rest of it, which you don't get with a pound note. So, overall, we just apply our principles to each new situation, which gives us a very practical and solid base from which to take on anything that gets thrown at us.
Thank you. And finally, in terms of AI, you've made two positive references to it in the last few minutes. In terms of that becoming more significant, is it a real thing? Is it something that you really expect to see being of major importance?
We saw a conference recently, the international conference, not the European one. There were presentations on it, and they have, the international regulators have committees and interest groups that are funded by different countries, and they are looking at actively trying to find standards for data that people can subscribe to. And once you've got a standard of data, then you have to deal with the GDPR implications and all the rest of it. But if you can anonymize it, so in reality, I mean, I think AI is coming whether we want it or not. It's happening because it's just a natural progression of the ability of computing.
So every regulator's in a race against criminals, because criminals are early adopters of anything that can help them. They're not constrained by labour law or regulations or typically money. So as a regulator, I endeavour to get ahead of that and to have products which can compete against criminally owned operations, so that people have got a choice to put their money into legitimate good businesses rather than criminal offerings which abound. So one of our missions is to work out how criminals can exploit AI and leverage all of that power against our licensees. So
thank you. So you've talked just a little bit about the AI in terms of the industry, but for the GSE, you as a group, as a business, as an organisation, let's say, what do you see as the sort of opportunities or threats?
Yeah. So Andy Ralphs at the government conference last month, he indicated that some of that £10 million saving will come from us leveraging AI. Leveraging technology, improving the user experience, etc. One of the things that the Department for Enterprise have indicated to us, and industry had a certain amount of sentiment about as well, is that our current process for receiving applications is very clunky, very dated, and could be a lot more frictionless. And I know that one of the Innovation Challenge winners, an organisation called Umazi, they're pioneering a way to create a digital identity that can then be given to every single government organisation that requires it separately, so that it makes that frictionless interaction more seamless. So getting ready to accept that sort of thing is part of what we probably have to do, and there's an intrinsic good in making our application process more electronic, for want of a better word. At the moment it isn't so. But I'm sure you'll be aware, technology can also create projects which overrun and they cost more than they deliver, etc. So with the financial discipline priority on government, we have to think very hard about what we do. To a certain extent, we'll be leveraging our existing asset, Atlas. Yeah.
Thank you. And with regards, just going back to that financial discipline, have you set targets within GSC?
Yes, don't go into deficit. The tone of conversation with Treasury changes completely when you need money from them. So we must remain self-funding as far as we can.
And with regards to efficiencies, what do you hope to contribute to that 10 million? So
we've leveraged a lot of efficiencies from our Atlas system. So previously we put an awful lot of effort into training up an inspector who then receives a quarterly return from an operator with 70 or 80 data points, which would then have to be typed in to the system so that we had one version of the truth. That's all automated now, so that's tremendous. And we also gained sort of safety from having that system as well, because you're not going to a spreadsheet and wondering whether somebody's put the latest information somewhere else. Or we had a situation mercifully a few years ago where our master spreadsheet just disappeared. So we were able to get that back from GTS as a backup, but it turned out it had just been accidentally dragged into another folder and we didn't know. So the system's giving us a lot of benefits, a lot of efficiencies, and some safety. In terms of cost improvement plans, it's on the radar. I recognise that everyone's going to have to do their bit in government, whether they're large or small. So, yeah.
When do you expect to implement cost improvement programmes?
Once I get confirmed in post, it's on my roadmap. Yeah, I see the necessity for it.
Thank you. That brings us to there was a little bit more than 6 questions. I do apologise. That draws us to the session close. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the committee? Anything that we haven't touched upon?
Not from me. Mark's always fully prepared. He has a list.
Only that we've got some legislation in train. So the FSA have kindly given us a slot on their bill, and some of our more urgent AML reforms are in that. And we've got a bill of our own that's we're aiming to get into branches in 2026 January, and hopefully get through before dissolution of Tenwold, which will contains a further raft of reforms, and some of the areas they seem trivial, but they take up a lot of our time. For example, prize draws, where a business offers a prize to stimulate trade, to stimulate interest in their products. At the moment, that's not permitted under Alaman law. It goes on in the Alaman, we tolerate it because it's low risk, but really to regularise that position, to give that opportunity to business. So other than that, no, I have nothing.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. The committee will now sit in the end. Thank you.
Right, yeah.